Thank you all for being here. And how many of you have been here before? Oh, so we got some new folks here. That's awesome. So what we like to do is we're going to have a kind of a 1-hour conversation this afternoon with Geoff. And before we kick things off, I just want to kind of highlight the purpose of the Startup Talks, and that is to be able to showcase the great things that are happening in the Gainesville region for the startup community specifically. I've lived here my whole life, so I've seen a lot of things come and go and the transitions that are taking place in our community. But having said that, in terms of the things that go, there seems to be more excitement and more traction and more energy in the startup community than there ever has been. I often, and I'll tell this very quickly, but I love telling the story. My brother graduated from the first class of computer sciences here at the University of Florida in the late 70s. Only to realize that what you have before you and the opportunities that exist here to start and grow your companies right here in Gainesville, in the Gainesville area, did not exist back in the late 70s. Virtually everyone who graduated, 100% kind of moved on. So he took his company out to California, Silicon Valley, and has prospered out there and done well and so forth. That shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen to a family who grows up here in Gainesville and wants to keep their family unit together. And he would love to have started and grown his company here and grown his family. And so that's the core of why we're doing this, is to showcase the great opportunities that exist, to build those connections, and to be able to have your questions answered so that you can engage those who are being successful, like Geoff, and be able to ask those good questions to see what kind of common threads kind of surface so that you can take your company to the next platform as well. So we'll get started. Geoff, I have to open by telling you, we've done this for 6 or 7 months. I think it's our 7th one. And every month we get together, Tori, who works for our company, we get together, and it's always, we have to get Geoff. We have to get Geoff with 352. So it's very, very exciting to have you here. I feel like I know Geoff like many of our previous speakers, but this is our first time actually really meeting. So we like to kind of go through just opening things up to get a little personal history,
Sure.
Your family, your kids, and where you're from and that kind of thing. So if you'll kick things off, and then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, so I went to UF in the late 90s and started my company 352 while I was a student. I started it my sophomore year of college. And it actually wasn't my career track. I was a telecom major. I was going to go into TV broadcasting, and I was set on going into TV broadcasting. And by the time I graduated, I had 8 employees working for me. And I decided that continuing to stick with the business, and most of them were UF students part-time, so it wasn't like a big payroll, but nonetheless, 8 people. And I decided sticking with the business was a better path than going off to Paducah, Kentucky to be a television reporter for $19,000 a year. So I stuck with it, and the company thankfully has grown, prospered. We've been able to hire a lot of great people in Gainesville, and then over the years expand out to Atlanta as well as down to Tampa. So we have 3 offices today. I actually live in Atlanta, but the bulk majority of our employees are here in Gainesville. Our office in Gainesville is out at Tioga Town Center. If you're ever out that way, there's 352, big 352 on the building, and that's where we're at. So it's been fun. Along the way, I've started a series of startups as well, technology product startups, and have had a couple of really big successes, one really big exit, and a colossal failure as well. So it's been, and I also started, some of you may remember them, Gainesville used to have some Ben & Jerry's ice cream stores. So I started those as well, one which is now a Mochi right across on University Avenue, and then there was one on Archer Road and one in the mall for a long time. So I started those and ran those for about 10 years.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of things, but yeah, the city's been a big part of all of that.
Married?
I am married and 3 kids.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
yeah, I knew you were. I actually heard, but
which, by the way, I'll tell you guys now, entrepreneurs, if you want to start a company when you're young, because it is a hell of a lot easier to get it off the ground once you start having kids and you have house payments and you have mouths to feed and you have car loans. Yeah, it gets much more difficult to start a company. So I think the best time to start a company is while you're in college. That is personally what I think is the absolute best time to start. I'm from Sarasota originally.
Sarasota, fantastic. So, you started 352 while in college.
Yes.
And you've had what other companies between then and now?
Yeah, so I started 352, so that was late 90s. I opened the first Ben & Jerry's ice cream store 2003, and then opened up a few others of those. I got into this kind of the startup game on my own in 2008 when I launched an online virtual world for kids, a game, a multiplayer online world called Camp Pete. And that was 2008. That one failed. And then started swamprentals.com, which is a apartment website some of you guys may be familiar with a business partner, a good friend of mine. We started that together in 2010. And so we still have Swamp Rentals, and now we've got 407 Apartments and Rent Tampa Bay and Rent Tallahassee and Rent Jacksonville and so forth. And then started a software as a service company called Social News Desk, a social media company in 2011 with my wife. And then just last year started a couple of other product type companies.
Okay. So before we get into contrast, because I think that's going to be a little bit different than some of our previous speakers, having the value of multiple of companies that you've started, some successful, some not. I definitely want to talk more about that in a minute. But first, let's find out, what does 352 Media do?
Yeah, so we call ourselves a digital product development and marketing agency.
Okay.
So basically we build websites, we build apps, we build software. It's all online, and then we help market it and get it to market. So probably, what a lot of startups do, where you guys are trying to build out a product and get users for it and get it out to market. That's what we do for clients. Most of the clients who hire us are big companies. Most startups are lean and bootstrapping and trying to kind of assemble their own team, and that's the right way that a startup should do things. But larger companies want to, put out innovative new products as well, and they often look outside the four walls of their own company because their employees are corporate enterprise people and not necessarily startup product thinkers, and so that's what we bring to the table. So whether it's like Fifth Third Bank or Auto Trader or CNN or these various companies we've worked for over the years, Wells Fargo, and have done this type of work for.
So do you help them? Do you operate the apps also? I mean, do you hand it off, or do you also?
Yeah, it depends.
Okay.
Some of the companies will hire us to build it out, and then they'll want to bring it back in house to manage and maintain it. Other companies want us to run the entire thing for them. So it just depends on what the product is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's stay with the very beginning here, because that's the key. So you were in college and you had the idea to build websites?
Yeah, it was very simple. I had no grand vision. I think vision is overrated. I think that startups, trying to found something and have this grand long-term plan for the future is unrealistic. Your plan's wrong, so why have one? I think just start and get moving and be willing to pivot and iterate. And that's more important. Like having a process of being able to see where the market leads you and take advantages of opportunities is more important than being a visionary and trying to see, where you're going to be 3 or 5 years from now. So when I started 352, it was honestly, I had no grand vision to build some big agency. It was just simply, I knew how to do basic HTML. This was the late 90s. A lot of businesses were building, well, a lot of them were web pages, not even websites, but they were building web pages to get online for the very first time. And I knew how to do it, and I could do it in my fraternity house, which is what I did it in. Right. And I had a 7 fraternity row. I had a 1-800 number literally run into my fraternity house room, and it was the greatest thing because when I was away at class, all the guys in my fraternity helped by answering the phone with my company greeting, and so my clients thought I had a staff of like 30 people. Every time they called, someone different answered the phone. So it was good for the most part. And true story, a year after I started and I was running in the fraternity house, one day I had a client call at like 11 in the morning, and of course there were, for whatever reason, a group of guys in my fraternity decided they needed to start drinking at like 8 in the morning. So by 11 in the morning they were a little sloshed, and one of them answered the phone. My phone started ringing, and one of them thought it would be funny and answered the phone, Geoff's Love Shack. And so it was that moment
Your first
that I
client.
decided I should probably get an office and move my operation out of the fraternity house,
Yeah.
which I did.
That's probably a good idea.
But yeah, it was a good way to get started.
Well, you talked about pivoting. That might.
Yes,
be
that was
good
a small
pivot.
pivot. Yeah.
So one of the I'm going to ask a really random question. Did you feel like growing up that you would always work for yourself, or have you worked for others many times?
Yeah,
What
I
other
always felt like I
jobs?
would work for myself. I never, I actually did a entrepreneurial thing in high school where I was doing computer repair and that kind of stuff. And so I just never, I don't know, I just kind of had the natural drive to do my own thing.
Random
and find
question.
my own way.
Your parents self-employed?
I mean, they're lawyers, and lawyers kind of are self-employed in a sense, right? And they had their own practice, so yeah, they were self-employed, yeah.
I just wonder sometimes the genesis of how people kind of get that launch to say, you know, I can do this myself.
Yeah.
And so, do you have any points of interest that really you can draw to say, that's why I'm going to work for myself?
No, I mean, like, nothing bad happened to me
Yeah.
that, you know, that caused me to like hate corporate America or something
Right.
like that. But I just always, I just always wanted to try to, you know, kind of make things happen
Sure.
and create my own future. And so it just, you know.
How many employees do y'all have now?
We got about 60,
60
Yeah.
employees. And how many are here in Gainesville?
close to, I think, around 30 in Gainesville,
Mm-hmm.
and then the rest are in Tampa and Atlanta.
Right. So you keep a presence here, and of course you're in Atlanta. So for your particular business, and I was talking to some folks earlier about where do you plant your company. Some companies, quite honestly, can be anywhere in the world, right? I mean, it just depends what kind of widget that you really have a hold of. Why do you feel it's important to have the Tampa, Gainesville, and Atlanta footprint?
You know, for us, it's having like an Atlanta Gainesville combination for us is really good, because Atlanta brings big companies with big sales opportunities. Gainesville brings really good company culture and employee loyalty. I will say, you know, we've expanded a lot up in Atlanta. It's a different atmosphere in a big city. It's a different atmosphere in Atlanta. People are, from an employer standpoint, your employees are not as loyal. They are jumping around, you know, company to company, trying to kind of get up to the next level, work the ladder, go from startup
Right.
to startup, or you know, corporation to corporation. So there's a lot of movement. It's hard to have kind of consistency. There's also a ton of competition in Atlanta. Salary competition is really high, because there are so many venture-backed product companies that are throwing, you know,
Signing bonuses.
yeah, lots of money at people.
Right.
It's intense up there, but there's a big advantage to being in Atlanta, and that's the scope of the companies that are the established corporations up there to sell services to.
Right.
So I really like our balance of having folks in Gainesville, where I feel like we've created a great culture. We have a lot of employees in Gainesville that have been with us a long time. I feel like Gainesville offers a really great living environment, a really great work environment, yet we can still take advantage of being able to attract clients in Atlanta. And that's what we do. I mean, a lot of our Gainesville teams now work with our Atlanta clients, and so we'll win projects in Atlanta and then bring the projects down to Gainesville.
here,
And it's worked out really well. And then Tampa, we actually started Tampa because we had a number of our employees who were leaving Gainesville at some point because they wanted to go to a bigger city. And we noticed a trend that most of those employees were actually going out of Tampa because that's where they were originally from.
Right.
And so we said, well, we don't want to lose good people, so maybe we'll start in Tampa as well, and then we'll kind of have a variety of options to offer our employees who want to move around.
I think you're one of the first folks we've talked to that have multiple locations like that. Certainly multiple. How do you keep the company culture kind of glued together?
That's tough. It's tough. Each office takes on its own culture. It's hard to keep consistency across the offices. Honestly, I think the best way to do it, and how we have now organized, is that most of our teams are co-located within a particular office. So each of our offices, in many ways, is kind of a full-service agency in and of its own.
All right.
So the offices are operating somewhat independent of each other, but it's important to you know, to maintain kind of consistency in vision and values and everything like that. It's important to bring everybody together. I mean, you can't be face to face. We do a annual company retreat. In fact, we did it in Gainesville this year, about a month ago. where we brought all of our employees in and did 3 days in Gainesville with everyone together. So that was a lot of fun and a good opportunity. And then on a department level, like all the programmers will get together once or twice a year, all the designers will, and so they'll all go into the same city and spend some time, and so I think doing that kind of stuff is really important.
So you started off with 8 employees by the time you had graduated, correct? And so sticking with the company culture a little bit, because I think that's really important too for some of the successes. I've been involved in a lot of different startups, and there seems to be somewhat an energy that's built around the kind of people you have around you and with you. How would you rank that? The way I like to ask the question is product versus people. So you had this great idea about a product and you're going to monetize it, as we talk about. So you've got this great idea to take to market that either has competition or doesn't, depending on patent technologies and so forth. And then you have the people that are going to do it.
Right.
And some people really focus on one side versus the other. You can call it customer service versus profitability. Where do you come in all of that in terms of really building the culture?
It's very, very rare for a product to be able to carry a business. And from the standpoint that the product idea that you come up with at the beginning is able to actually catch hold and take on such fire that it can overcome the people.
Mm-hmm.
It happens occasionally. I mean, there's been some companies in the news recently, like maybe you could even say Uber or Zenefits or some of these bigger companies you've seen despite themselves, have gone on and had a lot of success because the product and the idea was really, really good, but that's rare. Most of the time, it's the people being more important than the product, because of the fact that whatever your idea is today is not going to end up being perfectly successful, and there's going to be pivots and there's going to be nuances to how you have to take that along the way, and there's going to be a lot of learning that has to happen and a lot of course correction that has to happen.
Right.
And you can only achieve that if you've got good people that are committed, that are moving quickly. Yeah.
Well, I think culture is really, really key, and of course those beginning folks at the core make a huge difference. So let me ask you a little bit about some highs and lows. So I think it's important because every startup kind of goes through its struggles, right? Or you at least, you quantify them as struggles. Sometimes those struggles aren't as bad as what others have to go through. What were some of the more difficult challenges in terms of the startups you've had?
Sure. Well, they're a little different. So 352 is a service business, right? We build websites and software for people, so people hire us. Service businesses are much easier to get started with because, it's pretty much, it can start with you, and you're doing something, and either someone's going to pay you money or they're not going to pay you money, and if they don't pay you money, then you don't have a business. And when they pay you money, well, now you got a little business and you're doing something. And at some point, you move from doing it yourself to having a couple of people doing it with you, and if you're really successful at sales and marketing, then you're going to have more and more people doing it with you and that type of thing. So service businesses are much easier to get going. And I think they're good businesses for first-time entrepreneurs to start with. Product businesses are much tougher. Product businesses, like when you look at the failure rates of businesses and startups and why they all fail, well, product-based startups have a high failure rate. Service-based startups, not as much, because you are doing something and someone's going to pay you or they're not, so it's either going to get off the ground or it's not. The problem with service-based businesses is they become extremely difficult to scale. And you're scaling based on hiring employees, you're scaling based on headcount. As a result of that, they are only profitable to a certain point as well, because you're really just marking up your people's time, and you can only make so much money off of marking up someone's time before the customer is not willing to pay for it. So service businesses are not a good business model for scale, but they're a really good business model to get started. So you can avoid some of those common, founder pitfalls by starting with a service company. So 352, our problems along the years of 352 have been more operational. Thankfully, we were able to generate sales and marketing demand at times kind of outpacing supply. And so our challenge was, how do you hire more people and yet deliver a consistent level of quality? And that's really where challenges came into play. And we had some big challenges with that over the years, where you're trying to grow and you're trying to scale and you're trying to add people quickly, but the quality you output is based upon the person and what they're doing, and you can't control all of that centrally. And so that becomes challenging and difficult. And we encountered some of that over the years. A lot of learning lessons.
Talk about, so when you start a company, you need to find talent, okay? And so you have this competition factor. You talked a little bit about Atlanta's competition for talent. What do you sense in the Gainesville market in terms of, I assume by what you said that you're keeping your people for longer periods of time versus that transitional employee and so forth. Are you finding what you need here?
Yeah, Gainesville's advantage is that it has obviously a lot of young, passionate, students and recently former students who are trying to make things happen and are passionate about what they're doing. It's lacking a level of experience above that, right? There's a kind of a mid-professional grade people who really understand product and tech marketing and everything like that there's not as much of in this market. Thankfully, that's getting better. And the work that, for example, Aaron Dixon has done by setting up this series and trying to really foster this community in Gainesville, and you being here talking about it and hosting these things, that's really important. And I'm glad that Gainesville has really started to develop that out so that, we can have more folks grow into those types of roles. I think that if you're starting a company in Gainesville, your best bet is to take advantage of what the local market has to offer. Now, we at 352, we used to do a really good job of that. We used to do, throughout a lot of our growth, we would do smaller websites, more small business type websites, charge a lower fee, and we used interns like crazy. We put together a really, really good internship program, and we got to the point where we were taking 15 to 20 interns per semester, spring, summer, and fall from UF and from Santa Fe. And we had kind of a formal training program, and then they were doing work for us as part of that. And that was a really good setup. That was taking advantage of the resources in Gainesville. Now, over the years, we shifted to doing more of the larger corporate work. As a result of that, it's actually more challenging for us today because I can't take someone right brand new out of UF or an intern and put them immediately on a client project for Fifth Third Bank. Where Fifth Third Bank's risk management team is reviewing all the code for security holes, and it's intense. And so there's a little bit more of a gap now for us, which is a little bit tougher. But it's, but that's kind of how we've evolved as a company. But if I were starting another company in Gainesville, I would definitely try to take advantage of the young, enthusiastic talent that you have here and try to figure out a way to work that into my business model of how I'm going to grow and scale.
And I think that's one of the probably strong suits for Gainesville, quite honestly.
Yeah.
As I just actually got back from San Francisco yesterday, and like you're talking about, the talent is so heavily chased out there.
Yep.
And it makes it difficult for a lot of companies.
Well, I'll give you an example. So when we set up in Atlanta, we still take some interns from UF, and we do a little stipend for our internship program, but it's not a lot of money. It's not nice little, yeah, it's not a lot of money. But then, we said, okay, well, I'm gonna get something started at Georgia Tech because our office in Atlanta is right on Georgia Tech's campus. I said, great, we're gonna take interns from Georgia. So I go over to Georgia Tech and go meet with their career people. I'm like, hey, how are people getting interns? And they said, well, if you're not offering $20 an hour for an intern, don't even bother. You're not gonna get attention from anybody. And I said, $20 an hour for an intern? Like, they're like, oh yeah, like internships here are minimum $20 an hour for a Georgia Tech student. And I'm like, damn. So, that competition for labor, it's at every level, right? And it would be much harder to get a company going in Atlanta, in that regard.
Yeah. So you just kind of touched on it. So let's talk about funding. What kind of funding sources did you have in the beginning?
Well, I'm a big fan of bootstrapping. I bootstrapped. Now, again, it's easier to bootstrap a service company than it is a product company. Because with a service company, again, it's like, hey, I'm going to build websites. Someone's hopefully going to pay me. I'm going to hopefully charge them a little money up front. And great, I just got my seed round. I got my, my $1,500 deposit to build the first $5,000 website I'm going to build for somebody. That was my $1,500 seed round, essentially, right? So So that's much easier. Product companies are obviously they either take capital up front or they take a lot of sleeping on couches and ramen noodles up front, right? Which is the route that I personally prefer. I think that businesses, I think startups are more likely. I heard this line today. I think startups are more likely to die from overeating than they are to die from starvation. And I think that you see that a lot. And I think there's people right now predicting we're in a tech bubble and all this stuff. And some of the reason for that is because you're really starting to see, especially in the Valley, and you're starting, and even in Atlanta, like capital is relatively easy to get right now, or at least in the larger cities it seems to be. And people seem to be, it seems to maybe potentially be a little bit too easy to get, in my opinion, at least in those areas.
Have you ever had a funding crunch?
No.
Pressed up against?
No, I've self-funded everything that I've done. Now I've been fortunate in that regard because I used 352 to get started, and then I used the cash flow from 352 to start all of those different ventures along the way. So I've never actually taken an external investor in any of my ventures that I've done. And now I'm actually doing some startup investing.
Right.
So now I'm coming at it from the other angle,
Right.
which has been an interesting experience.
So, myself included in this, we all love talking about our successes, but we really don't like diving into our failures.
Sure.
And the reality is, not everything's a home run or for even a single, right? So I think it's important to learn from the value of those failures. And so let's talk. I don't know. Earlier, I think you had said.
Camp Pete.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so take us through that iteration, your dream of the concept, and how you plan to monetize it, and then it's.
Yeah. So this was like 2008. I was feeling, 352 was doing well. We were growing a lot. I had the Ben & Jerry's stores going. My wife was leaving her job and wanted to do kind of a tech entrepreneurial type business. And so her and I thought about a lot of different product ideas. And so we said, well, being in Gainesville, what resources here do we have that could play into a product idea for like a digital product? And so we did a lot of, surveying and looking at different things. And one thing we said, well, the sports teams, right? I mean, at that time it was huge, right? We had Tebow, we were winning national championships. And so I said, well, maybe we do something related to sports, and somehow we bring that online and we take advantage of the UF teams. And so we came up with this concept that we were going to build. This is kind of when online multiplayer worlds were kind of Second Life was like, really, I don't know, it's nothing anymore. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it was a big thing. And then for kids, there was Club Penguin, which still is around today, but back then it was huge. And Webkins and that kind of thing. And so Club Penguin, by the way, was started by a web design company in Canada, a 12-person web design company. In 2006, they were light on work. And so the founder had this idea. He's like, I want to build this online game for kids. He had young kids. And he's like, there's not really like a cool online game world that kids can like log in on a computer and like play games against each other. And he's like, I'm going to build that. I'm going to use 3 of my developers who are down from project work to build this thing. 14 months later, he sold it to Disney for $700 million. So I read that story and I was like, well, shit, I own a web design company. Like, what's going on here? So anyway, my wife and I decided we were going to build the first online kids world with a sports theme, and we were going to appeal to young boys, and our demographic was going to be like, boys between ages 6 and 10. And it was going to be an online football world, and we were going to partner up with UF, and we were going to get Urban Meyer to do all this stuff for it and everything like that. And so we put together a presentation and went after Urban Meyer, and he wouldn't give us the time of day. And but I was like, you know what? Screw that guy. This is too good of an idea. We're not going to let this die. So I started calling agents. I started calling universities. I started calling conferences. I just burned up the phone lines to people. and was pushy, and we got Pete Carroll, who at the time was the coach of USC, is now the Seattle Seahawks coach, and he liked the idea and said, I want to do it. So we signed him into a deal. We gave him a little bit of money up front, and then it was a royalty deal, and it was, so we created camppete.com, and it was Pete Carroll's online football world for kids. We flew out to LA, and we shot hours of video with him, and then we worked with his team to create all the scenes, and it was like kind of an intro to football for a young kid, and it was a cool game. And I had some of my team at 352 work on this thing. We worked on this thing for a year and a half, and we put it out to market. A year and a half of several people in my company working on it solid, and that was the biggest mistake that I possibly could have made. We launched it, and so what changed, and by the way, along the way, as we were building it out, before we ever put it out on market, just as it was getting built out, I became so confident that I was seeing this thing, I'm like, this thing is going to be amazing. I'm like, we don't just need Pete Carroll, we need more people, because we can't just be California and LA, we got to be national. So we started calling other people. So I got Steve Spurrier. We created campspurrier.com. I got Charlie Weiss, who was Notre Dame at the time. I got Phil Fulmer, who was Tennessee at the time. I got Barry Switzer, who was the old Cowboys and Oklahoma coach. Who else did I get? I got one or two others. And we literally went around and, all these guys collaborated on this thing. This thing I was convinced was going to be the greatest success ever. And we launched it, and it was a complete and abysmal failure. Complete failure. And the reason why is because it was a few different things happened. One is that I wasn't the only person who read the article about Club Penguin selling for $700 million. And when we started development, there were only 2 kids-themed online worlds. Only 2 in existence, Club Penguin and Webkinz. They were the only 2. When we launched a year and a half later, there were 243 online-themed kids worlds online. Additionally, 1 month before we launched, a sports-themed online kids world called Action All-Stars launched that was backed by $14 million in Silicon Valley money. And then 3 weeks after we launched, the NFL launched their own online kids world called NFL Rush Zone, which still exists today. And that season that they launched it, they then used every single NFL game to advertise NFL Rush Zone. So we were up against that. Additionally, this was 2008, 2009, and we were all Flash-based, as were these other things. And then all of a sudden, the iPhone came out, and then the iPad came out. And all of a sudden, there was a movement against Flash, and there was a movement where gaming was starting to shift to devices, and starting to shift to mobile and tablet, and shift away from the keyboard and the mouse. And so all of these things were happening, and we were like, oh my God, we completely mistimed the market. What we had a novel idea that was no longer a novel idea. And in addition to all of that, the features that we spent so long working on, kids didn't give a damn about. It confused them, they didn't care. It was the stupid little things that one of our developers was just having fun on a Thursday afternoon and spent 4 hours on and threw in the game, that were the things the kids loved. And it was a disaster. We lost tons and tons of money and ended up completely shutting the thing down after less than 2 years. The 2 biggest lessons that I learned on that was, first of all, never, ever, ever, ever spend a year and a half or even a year or even 6 months building a product before putting it out to your customers. Never do that. You can't do that. You've got to build in short cycles, and you got to put it in people's hands and let them dictate if you have a good idea or not, because you don't know that you have a good idea until they tell you that. And so the quickest thing you need to do is get it in their hands. And then the other thing was you've got to involve them throughout the process as well, and you've got to really understand what they're going to like and not like, and do user testing throughout and all that type of thing. And we made those mistakes. And it's funny because then the book Lean Startup came out, which is a book I'd recommend any entrepreneur, startup entrepreneur read. And that book came out literally right as I was shutting the site down. And I was like, great, thanks for all these lessons now. I would have appreciated reading that a couple of years prior, in terms of, I'd learned all those things the hard way. So yeah, but we took a lot of, but here's the great part of the story. if you are going to be an entrepreneur, you got to be a little bit stupid, and you got to be able to, you got to have short-term memory loss, because you got to be able to fail like that and somehow be able to completely forget about that, and then the following day get up out of bed and start something else. I mean, that's the only way you're going to be successful at this game. That's the only way you're going to be successful at this game. You can't just have a failure like that and tuck your tail between your legs and be gone, because chances are the first thing you're going to do is fail. So you're either committed to the idea of being an entrepreneur long term and scrapping till this actually works out for you, or you're committed to one particular product idea that is destined to fail, so don't even do it. And so we were the stupid short-term memory loss entrepreneurs who tucked our tail between our legs and said, okay, that sucked. Now let's start the next thing. And we said, well, let's take all the lessons that we learned from that first failure and let's bring those into the next startup that we start together. This is my wife and I. And so then we decided to start Social News Desk, which was, she was, like me, a broadcast journalism major. And so Social News Desk is a social media management system where you can post to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and see interaction. And it does all kinds of fancy things now, like for a TV station, you can put tweets on air and Facebook posts on and run polls and all this stuff. And this was 2010, so it was right when social was starting to emerge, and TV stations had no idea how to, social wasn't on air yet. People didn't know how to do it, but it was starting to become a thing. And so we built the first system, but we said this time, okay, we made a couple commitments. One, product's going to be in customers' hands within 90 days, or we're going to shut it down. Two, we're going to spend no more than $50,000 of our own money before we get traction in the marketplace. So we decided those are two things. Three, we're going to find some customers very early who are willing to be beta testers for us, and we're going to involve them throughout the process. So those were three things that we did. Completely different outcome. Social News Desk, it caught traction right away. We had great relationships with the customers. We were able to iterate. We were able to put it into a newsroom environment within 90 days. We were able to see how people were using it. And the first version of it wasn't good. It was a kind of a crappy, incomplete product, but it was good enough to put in people's hands and see what they thought of it and how they were going to use it. And we learned a ton. And really, in my opinion now, when you're launching a product, what you do up to the first launch is less important than what you do in the weeks and months after that first launch. Because it's really how well you iterate and how well you take advantage of customer feedback and build the product in the direction of the customer that's more critical to your success than what your original idea was that you put into market in the first place. I think that's true with a lot of products. And that was true for Social News Desk. And so those lessons that we learned from the first one made a tremendous difference the second time around. Fast forward to today, Social News Desk is now used by 85% of the television stations in the US to manage their Facebook and Twitter and social media and everything like that. In 2014, it was acquired by a Fortune 500 company, $12 million exit. So we went from a colossal failure to a huge success, then back to back, and the failure led to the lessons of the success. And that's the thing with this, with doing the startup stuff, you only have to be right once. You only have to be right once. And if you think about this mathematically, every time you fail, as long as you limit your losses, right? As long as you are only going to allow yourself to go 90 days or something like that before you get a product out and only spend so much money, then you're really only committing yourself to the most you can lose on a product might be 50K or something like that, or 100K at most, and this much of your time. But if you're right once, the upside is $5 million, $10 million, $50 million, $100 million. So from an investing standpoint, you should be doing this. Why would you not risk a series of $50,000 failures for the opportunity to move up 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, right? I mean, it makes sense to do that. Now, with that being said, you've got to be able to live through those failure points. And unfortunately, this isn't easy, and those failure points can happen, and they can happen a lot. And even the journey up to the really successful company is not an easy journey. And it's a journey with a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of stress and a lot of 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards, and 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards, and that's if you're doing really, really well. Right. So got to be ready for that.
Well, I can tell you that I wish I would have known the $50,000 was my limit before I lost my $3 million on a deal one time. I promise you that.
Yeah.
So here's the interesting part. So the most poetic thing that I think that I've taken away tonight, quite honestly, is the value of going forward after the failure. And I did have a failure that exceeded $3 million. Now I've had some successes that were, stratosphere also, and that's the reason I went further than I probably should have. And quite candidly, my ego got in the way. My ego said, I'm going to plow through this because I have the funds to do it. I just thought I could buy my way to success until I realized it's not getting any better, no matter what kinds of dollars I threw at it. And I truly did lose over $3 million of my own funds in a business that I started up. But
good for you, by the way, for talking about that.
yeah,
So, because a lot of people, they would not talk about that, but that's great because you.
What's interesting is I rarely ever talk about it, and it's not that I'm ashamed of it. It's that I've totally forgot about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, truly,
Yep.
you have. That's the reason I just said it. The most poetic thing you've said is letting that go.
Yep.
Because how many times could you dwell on spending that $3 million again and again and again? How many $50,000 chasers could I just throw out there? And probably one of them would hit, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a tough thing, and it's an ego drive because I had sold one of my companies to the Hearst Corporation for lots of money, and I have a non-disclosure agreement. Is the reason I can't tell you, but so I had the resources to do it, and I just thought, hey, I'll just go do another one of these again. And so it was an ego drive that got in front of me. And I think that's one. So I'm going to ask you, that's mine. Mm-hmm. And so what was it, at what point did you throw in the towel? I mean, when did you?
We went way too far. Yeah. I mean, we should have thrown in the towel a lot earlier, but it becomes, you feel like when you invest that much money into something, now you feel like you're pot committed to just continue to put money in it. And then there's an ego element that comes into play and everything like that. So, I don't remember the exact moment, but it just became overwhelmingly evident, like we are not going to be able to sustain this. And just seeing the cash burn, like the money we were burning on a month after month basis and getting nowhere with it, it was time to go. Right. And it really was time to go a lot earlier than that, but we kept at it too long. Right. But yeah, I mean, you can't, that's the thing, like, what's interesting between your first success and then I think successes beyond that is that the money doesn't matter as much anymore, mm-hmm. and like the fear of failure matters less, I think, over time once you've had the experience of having a big failure and you've had some successes and you learn a lesson through a big failure, and then it's like it starts to matter a little bit less over time. And I think you begin to think of money as a tool, just like anything else is a tool, just like a line of software code is a tool, just like a marketing plan is a tool, money is a tool. And so you're really just using it as kind of a resource to do other things. And you have to have separation, like you have to be able to separate that, because if you have I lost that money, damn, but if you have this deep personal investment into it and you can't forget about it, then it's gonna ruin your ability to do this forever. Right. And some people can't. Some people are, it's just like the dollars and what we're talking about and the risk, it just becomes overwhelming. And so the personality, this whole startup thing is not for everybody's personality. Right. Like they can't quite handle it. Right. I mean, I think you have to have a little bit of, you have to be a little bit of a gambler. Like I'm not encouraging people to gamble, but I do a Vegas trip each year with friends, and sometimes we'll take a new friend on the Vegas trip, and it's interesting to see how people react to putting money on the blackjack table or to betting on sports, because some people are like, they get like real, like, oh my God, I'm putting, $25 and I just lost the hand, and they get in their own head with watching that happen. And I look at it and I'm like, that's great, but you're not gonna be an entrepreneur, because this is just like that. You can't, you got to have some separation from that to be. You can't dwell the $200 you lost at the blackjack table. Right. If you're still thinking about that at dinner 3 hours later, you can't be an entrepreneur, you know?
Right.
So.
Or you better learn how to play blackjack better.
That's right.
So this is an exciting part. Is there anything that I didn't ask you want to share with anybody, everybody? We're going to open it up to questions.
No, it's good.
I just like to give you an opportunity. So we have about 14, 15 minutes. So questions for Geoff. Yep, Aaron.
So one of the biggest things that kind of stuck with me that you talked about at the very beginning is that you said, go with a simple idea, work with that, and don't necessarily focus on the vision. With a company in my mind like 352, over time, I feel like you've had to change the vision based off of technology. At what points do you know, like, okay, this is a time that we need to change the vision of what we're doing? And how do you know, like, at the point of maybe let's not focus so much on the Gainesville area, but let's expand to Atlanta because now you have huge companies that you're going to go after. What levels do you see yourself saying, okay, this is when actually we do need to focus on the vision and change the way that we approach?
Yeah, so that's a great idea. So let me clarify there. Vision is important. I just think in the beginning, vision's overrated. I think you should build vision for what you're doing as you start building your organization. Like you can build vision over time. You don't have to be Steve Jobs, the idea that Steve Jobs has this epiphany about the iPhone and wakes up one morning and builds this tremendous thing, like that's not for 99% of the world. It's not for me, right? It's instead, you start doing something and then over time, vision becomes more clear. And so, and then you need to change that vision, you need to pivot. So, I mean, with 352, those moments have just come at different points over time. I'll give you one example. One example is about 3 years ago, I was watching the Super Bowl 3 or 4 years ago, and that was the year that, as I'm sitting there watching the Super Bowl, there's a commercial for Wix, the build-it-yourself website platform. There's 2 commercials for Squarespace, and there's 2 commercials for GoDaddy's build-your-own-website platform. And I sat there and I watched that and I said, there were more commercials during the Super Bowl for build your own website than there were Coca-Cola commercials and Pepsi commercials combined and Budweiser commercials. And I said, oh shit, this is not good for us. And that was the moment that I was like, you know what? Web design is becoming a race to the bottom, and we can no longer be a web design agency because we have to change our vision quickly. Because we are going to get caught in this race to the bottom and people thinking they can do it all themselves and cheap WordPress and all this stuff that empowers people to do it on the cheap. And which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that stuff. Like a lot of those tools are great, but it also means that as an agency that's trying to charge premium prices, we can't be in that game. So that's when we said, we got to pivot a little bit, and our pivot was we repositioned ourselves as a digital product development agency, which means that we build sophisticated websites and apps that you could never do through a Squarespace or you could never build on WordPress or whatever. And so, and those are the types of projects specifically we go after now, because I'm like, that's not a race to the bottom yet. We'll see, and Indian firms and everything are trying to maybe make that as such, but we're trying to figure out what our niche is and how, and so, I'm sure our vision's going to continue to change, and every couple of years there will probably be kind of another big shift in what we're doing, and with startups it may be more rapid than that.
So I'm just real to interject, I'm a big believer on a business plan and strategy and what you're going to burn and that kind of thing. So not to be confused with the vision portion. So I want to make sure that it's defined right the way I'm understanding it. You still have to have a plan of action. You still have to know where you're going with this, with your product, right? But what you're really referring to is this grand, long vision, that you're going to be the end all to everybody. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, yes, but I would say
Are you a believer in the business plan?
I think the process of business planning is important because it makes you think through all aspects of your business. I think oftentimes folks will jump into a product idea as a startup and have not really thoroughly thought through the marketing aspects and have not really thoroughly thought through customer acquisition. There's in Atlanta, there's a massive startup space called Atlanta Tech Village that was created by a guy who he created Pardot, which is a marketing automation platform, actually competitors with SharpSpring. And he sold it for $100 million, and then he used the money to do this thing. So anyway, he says that as a founder, your first hire should be a developer, and your hires 2 through 10 should be sales and marketing. That's his mantra. Right. And perhaps it's a little bit overstated, but the theory behind it is right. It's like the product often is less important than the go-to-market strategy and how you're going to do customer acquisition and all that kind of stuff. And so I think the process of business planning is important because it forces you to think through some of that in the beginning. Forces you to think through economics and can I charge for this? How would I charge for this? But then I also think that once you get going, a lot of that planning work you did in the beginning becomes useless because it becomes...
I totally agree. I just
Right.
wanted to be confused
Yeah.
between really having a really well thought out
Yeah.
360 plan of action versus just this visionary kind of process.
Right.
So
Thank you.
Yep.
Sure. Yes, sir.
I have a question about the influence that Club, what was it, Club Pete?
And Pete, yep.
And the success that you had right after that with the exit. How those influenced 352? Did that cause you to shift perspective or change how things worked or anything there?
Yes, it made me increasingly annoyed and dissatisfied to be running a services company, to be quite honest with you. So, because scaling 352 is really difficult and really hard because you're dealing with, you win a bigger project, now I have to go hire people, now I have to go train people. You lose a couple of projects, well crap, maybe now I have to let people go. And we faced that over the years. We've had, win big projects, hire people, lose big projects, let people go. Not a good business to be in, but that's how agencies work, and that's how a lot of service companies work. And it's time-consuming and taxing, and it's not easy. Product companies, when you can scale, the scaling is a dream compared to a services company in terms of the profitability and the ability to go from 10 clients to 10,000 clients and not have to hire very many people in between 10 and 10,000 and all that stuff, right? So that's the dream, and so it's made me a little more anxious to get to progress 352 along. So one thing we've done in 352 is we've started our own internal R&D group, our own internal product group, and so I'm taking within 352, I'm taking some of the cash flow from our client services projects, and we're now building and incubating some of our own products to put out to market within 352. And I like that approach because I feel like not only does it give 352 the potential, like almost we're our own little tiny incubator and tiny seed fund within the agency. And so we'll spin out a number of things over the course of the next couple of years and see if anything takes hold. And I like it from the perspective of, okay, we're going to place a lot of little bets and hopefully something will hit in the marketplace and that will turn out to be a really good thing for the agency. But I also like it from the standpoint that it will give more of our employees on the services side more opportunity down the road. Because if we can get some product to take off and we can start adding roles there, that'll become very interesting in terms of people being able to switch back and forth between service and product, and getting everyone in the company more in the mindset of how successful products are built will help them with the client projects they're on if they're on the services side. So yeah.
Yes, sir. Mark?
Yeah, you said you like to use lean startup methodologies, and now you make these products for these big clients with big budgets. Do you guys still use lean startup for those big clients?
As much as we can, enterprises, big companies are awful at lean startup. Nothing they do is lean. Everything they do is like red tape and 80 review cycles, and they can't do anything faster with speed. And so the value proposition we offer to them is, hey, we're this little scrappy team on the side that can be kind of your startup, new idea, new product development group that can kind of cut out some of that tape, some of that red tape, and allow you to move quicker, but inevitably a little bit of that seeps into what we do. So where we see the slowdowns, for example, when we're working with these big companies is their branding team. Like, and it's understandable. Like Fifth Third Bank, for example. Like we build a new product for them that's kind of a startup of their own in estate planning. They built this estate like online app and website to help you do estate planning and will planning and that kind of stuff, and you pay a fee and go in and can build it all. You know, we build this thing, but then their marketing department is like, well, we have a very established brand, and we have, so we have to review every, you have to conform to all of our brand standards, and we have to review every use of our logo and make sure that, our logo has exactly 6 pixels of white space to the left of it whenever it's being used, and then of course security, we have to review everything, and then risk management and legal has to, and it's just like, so they take these, we try to apply lean startup as best we can. Inevitably they're not lean, but what we produce is still a hell of a lot quicker than anything they could have ever done in-house. So yeah, as best we can, we educate them on that stuff.
Are you guys doing like MVPs and stuff too, or is it?
Yes, we do, and we've got it. We do. I really like the design sprint methodology. That's something that we've gotten a lot into recently. Google Ventures has this 1 week, very focused, it's called a design sprint. They've put out books and articles about it, and it's about how to essentially like kind of vet new ideas in 5 days. And it's a very focused, like Monday you do this, Tuesday you do this, Wednesday you do prototyping during the week. You bring in actual customers into the office while you're doing prototyping, test things out on them, do revisions. It's a very intense, focused 1 week process. And we run those for clients. So we've got like right now a big manufacturing client that has a bunch of carpets and rugs, brands you would know, and they're using us to do those. So they're thinking about bringing like how do we take some of our physical products and build a digital presence for them and make them interactive and all that stuff. And so we're running a series of these like 1 week experiments to try to vet that out. So that's very true MVP. That's like we're building like a super rapid, lightweight prototype and putting it in front of people and seeing how they react to it and seeing if we can find a nugget of something that we think is a really good way for them to evolve.
Cool.
Aaron?
Hey, sorry. So you said the social news desk is now used by what, 84% of outlets across America. That's an incredible thing to think about. How did you know that it was the right time for an exit for you personally?
So first of all, to be clear, my wife runs that business day to day. Like her and I paired on the technology, but that is her show, right? And she came from the broadcast background, and so she. And by the way, I feel like females are best suited to be entrepreneurs. I'm a big believer in female entrepreneurs, and to all the women in the room, yes, I feel that female entrepreneurs often make better entrepreneurs than male entrepreneurs, and my wife included.
We tried to get her here, but she heard I was the host, and so just.
So I would, but anyway, so she wasn't trying to get acquired. We had finally reached the point. So we were 3 years in. She had gotten a large market share, but we were still the technology, there was the opportunity to really grow and evolve what she was doing. And we wanted to rebuild the technology from scratch and build something a lot more cutting edge. We wanted to add a lot of new features to it. We wanted to come out with new product lines to sell to our customers. So she said, I'm going to go fundraise. And that was the first time that we attempted to go fundraise. And that, by the way, is the best time to go fundraise. Like if you can avoid fundraising in the very beginning and you can get somewhere with your product and build some customers and some traction and some momentum, you will get a lot more investor offers and interest, and you will get to keep a lot more of the equity. And that is by far the best way to do it. And so if you can go, a couple years and get it off the ground and so that's what she was able to do. So she, 3 years in, she said, okay, now's the time to fundraise. She wanted to raise $1 million, and she wanted to give up 10% for $1 million. And so she went on a fundraising tour. And so her targets for the fundraising tour were actually a lot of the major TV groups. So actually Hearst and Scripps and a lot of these major media groups, they have investment arms. And so since she was in the TV media space, she's like, I'm going to go to a lot of these, media groups' investment arms. And so she pitched several of them. And one of the ones she pitched, after the presentation, one of the people said, we're interested in doing the investment, but we would also be interested in acquiring you outright. Would you be interested in an acquisition offer? And she said, sure, yeah. I mean, I'd listen to it. Like, that's not our intention, but I'd listen to the offer. And you know, they put forth an acquisition offer, and it was lower at first than what we wanted, but it was like, oh, this is, you know, this could be pretty good. And so there was a lot of back and forth negotiation, and then it was, you know, she kind of said in her mind, like, here's where I want to get the offer to, and if we get the offer above this level, I think we should take the offer and be acquired now. If we can't get the offer to this level, I just want investment money because I feel like I could continue to grow the company, build a lot of, you know, and then go maybe get acquired 3 years later or something like that. But we got the offer to that level, and so we decided that it was the right time to take the deal.
She still runs it day to day.
She does now, actually. Yeah. So they put her on a 3-year earnout, which is typical. So they gave her 50% of the cash up front for the acquisition, and then the other 50% they held back, and it's based upon, you know, milestones over the course of the next 3 years. The great news is that the company's done really well and has exceeded all the milestones thus far. Her final, so we're in year 3 right now of the earnout, and so it all ends this December. But she's probably going to stay on past December, but she's kind of talking to them and working all that stuff out now. They've asked her to stay on and continue to run the company and stay on in, you know, kind of a executive type capacity. So she's probably going to do that. So it's actually gone really well. Not all acquisitions do. You know, you hear a lot of horror stories about the founder got acquired and it was all exciting, but then the company that came in, you know, the founder didn't like, and they you know, messed everything up and all this internal political stuff. It often doesn't work well. And often the founder can not end up with the amount of money they thought they were going to get because the earnout or whatever it was gets sabotaged because of all the stuff that happens. But thankfully ours went really well.
Well, the great part about being here versus watching us live on Facebook and other media is that you can ask questions of Geoff after we wrap this up. We are at our 1 hour mark, and I do want to thank Aaron, wherever he went, and Quan and Pyle and everyone who helps put this on. I'd also be remiss if I did not mention our sponsor, who is Infinite Energy, and they have brought this to us every time, and so the food and drink and all that is sponsored by them, and we appreciate that. We will see you in 1 month, and we hope you have enjoyed today's startup talk. And Geoff, thank you very much.
Yeah,
It was awesome. Thank you.